investment that our transaction team want to take up to them. We leverage the support of our Chief Impact Officer, and we would also be working with Impact Seed as we bring deals through the pipeline. So we feel we've got a good group of support through that process.
Awesome. I'll hand back to right on.
Thank you, Jeremy. That is great to hear all that fantastic news coming out of Melbourne, other than the AFL at this stage. But look, I just want to get into our next session, which is aligning perspectives. And in this area, we've got, I think, we've got Di Haggerty, Piers Vestergen, we've got Oliver Barnes and Liz Brennan, who will be talking in regards to a few of the issues. So what I'll do is we will actually head towards each of those.
Yep.
So I think...
First question for Liz and Piers.
So first of all, Di Haggerty is farms with her husband Ian and their eldest son James over 24,000 hectares in the central Wheatbelt of Western Australia. Produce from the farm includes wheat, barley, oats, wool, grass, feed, sheep, meat, and breeding some ewes and rams. Di and family have developed a farming practice that relies on natural intelligence for plant, animal production and landscape restoration. So welcome, Di. Liz is, Elizabeth has facilitated a number of community and agricultural development programs and fresh produce marketing strategies in her home WA Wheatbelt region across Australia and Papua New Guinea. She is based on the family farm in Wongan Hills. And we have Oliver, who's has more than 12 years experience in managing and advising agricultural investment in emerging markets globally. He established one of West Africa's largest plantation forestry, facilitating more than $70 million US investment into the African agriculture sector, and headed up WA Sandalwood Plantation as Chief Operating Officer. He holds a Bachelor of Science in agricultural business management. And Piers is well known in Western Australia, is the Executive Director of the Conservation Council of Western Australia. He has been named by the West Australian newspaper as a ratbag. Oh no, sorry, I put that one in, as one of West Australia's 100 most influential people for his environmental advocacy and community leadership. Piers serves on the advisory board of Curtin University Sustainability Policy Institute. And thanks, Daniel.
My bad.
And Piers, has worked on a senior policy advisor with diverse experience in environmental science, law, politics, and economics. He's committed to supporting communities and individuals in achieving a more sustainable future. So welcome all four. So what we have now is, how do we align these perspectives of those four individuals? So I'm going to open up with Liz and Piers. So what we're looking for is, how do you see impact investment playing a role in the broader community landscape? And then how would you measure success?
Okay. Liz.
Liz, straight up. Righto, cool. Good morning, everyone. I'm currently dialing in from Whadjuk country, but as was mentioned in my introduction, our family farm in the WA Wheatbelt. So we farm across Balladon country and Ewart country. So I would like to pay my respects to the elders and leaders online with us today, but also those that have gone before us and those that are emerging. So I, just by way of kind of segue into responding to the question, a little background about how it is that I guess got into this space. So grew up in Wongan Hills, thought that the way that we farmed was pretty much, you know, the best way to farm. I then, you know, maximum yield. I think there was a couple of people, Oral and Jeremy, have both mentioned around value, and that was very much an economically driven, you know, business. And then I moved to Papua New Guinea for 2 years, and it really threw my perspectives on its head, and I became just fascinated. I lived in community with a lot of subsistence farmers, and it really questioned my fundamental belief around food security and how we achieve food security. And a lot of these traditional farmers were actually, I argue and still argue, Papua New Guinea is actually a more food secure country than Australia. So when I guess it really spurred this belief that we can't keep producing and consuming and living the way that we are. And it really bizarred me out that people didn't think that climate change was a real thing. Because I was like, how do you, we're only placing value in a very, you know, usually it's the dollar sign in the supermarket. We're not valuing anything beyond that. And as someone who, you know, on our farm, I have veto over what trees, if any, get removed because it's part of a system, and monoculture was mentioned earlier today. So when I came back to Australia about 10 years ago, I started to get curious about how it is that we can create, I think the term now is regenerative, how it is that we can create places, farming systems, communities that are really regenerative. And I sought out like-minded individuals to help me kind of, you know, just to test this theory, I guess. And I landed in regional development. And so I'll answer this question now with that lens from a community perspective. So in terms of investing, impact investing from a community perspective, I think it's really important, a bit like regenerative agriculture, to understand the natural resources that we're working with, and humans form such a big part of that. So I think real asset-based community development enables communities to, you know, I guess a number of different things. It creates a community sense of ownership over their future. I can't recall who mentioned hope. There's a sense of hope that's generated when a community can self-generate. It also can shift the handout mentality. So we saw in the wake of the work of the Regions program, all of those towns that were dubbed super towns created a dependency on these handouts and became really unable to be self-resilient. So I guess it's my argument for investing in people and leadership across, I mean, gender and culture has been mentioned as two metrics that we're not yet really embedding in terms of our diversity, but it's so important when we consider diversity. It is all parts of community. And I think also it builds, when we're investing in community, it builds capacity rather than just stuff. As mentioned, I come from a wonderful community in Wongan Hills where about 15 years ago, we had a fight with Telstra because we were too small. They weren't going to put a tower in. And so we raised $150,000 and they went to put a tower in, and they sort of got a bit offended by us. And they said, we better partner with you. And we ended up, they put 100 grand in, and we own our own community tower. And it spurred this, it's the Wongan Ballaju Business Development Group that has since built Community Resource Centre, a medical centre, 15 houses in town, housing for police, teachers. It's even built infrastructure in other neighbouring towns in Moora, Ballaju and around. So I think it's so important to invest in community and in people to ensure that there's resilient systems, and it's a whole ecosystem that we're investing in.
Piers, you ready?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for letting me be part of this really important conversation, and thanks for those who've hosted it and for the welcome to country. I think I'm actually got my head full of COVID recovery kind of thinking, because I've been lucky to be appointed to the state government's COVID recovery advisory group. And I just want to share a little bit about that, because I think it's extremely relevant to this conversation that we're having right here. And I just take so much heart from that story about, you know, our local community getting empowered around investing its own capital and attracting other capital from other places to support itself. I think the COVID recovery situation and COVID in general has been such an important learning for us on so many levels. And, you know, we will not know exactly how profound those learnings are for some time, I think. But the current one is that we can actually get back in control of our economy. We don't need to just feel like we're subject to the whims of the market and feel the sense of powerlessness that goes with, you know, either as a nation or as a community or as an individual actor, just, you know, being subject to this uncontrollable thing that we call the economy. We actually have control of that. And right now we're in this incredible opportunity where governments are stepping in and doing things, profound things, spending huge amounts of money. And implicit in that is making some real choices about how we want the direction of our economy to go and what we want our economy to deliver for us and look like. Not just, you know, growth and jobs, not just this glib kind of idea about growth and jobs, but what kind of jobs do we want? What kind of values do we want to create when we invest in different parts of the economy? So, you know, we've been putting together this amazing package of proposals and action that we're calling the Clean State and Conservation Recovery Plan for WA. And it's all about various different activities and initiatives across the state that reduce carbon emissions, that get people back into caring for country and conservation economies, and create jobs and boost the economy in the way that we need to get people back into the workforce post-COVID. The amazing thing is, and I'm just taking so much heart from this, is that the old idea that you stimulate the economy at the expense of the environment, that is actually just almost gone away. I mean, it's still there in some sectors, but it's now a totally mainstream idea that we can actually stimulate the economy and create jobs by taking action on climate change and by investing in environmental initiatives and caring for country. That's an incredibly amazing opportunity and inflection point in our whole psyche and our whole conversation, our whole idea around what growth actually is. And I've actually just commissioned some polling on this to see, you know, because we're seeing experts, you know, saying this in the media and that sort of thing, but I wanted to see whether that is resonating across Western Australians as a broader community. We asked people through polling, and we haven't released this yet, so this is a bit of a sneak preview. We asked people what are the best things they think that the government can be investing in terms of stimulating the economy and creating jobs. And guess what? Renewable energy, action on climate change, the care economy, caring for people, social housing, and caring for country, the conservation economy. These are the top things that people are saying that they want to see investment in as the best way to stimulate our economy. And the things like, you know, investing in the fossil fuel industry, what the Morrison government's looking at doing, investing in the gas industry, cutting green tape for the mining industry, these things are way down the list. They've got very low support. So we've actually got this incredible community awakening, I think. And what I'm talking about is at the macro level, but what, you know, the idea of impact investment is taking that and applying it at the micro level. And I think that there's incredible opportunities for partnership between a new way of thinking at the macro level and the impact investment kind of methodology at a micro level. I just want to finish off by saying that we've got to find ways, and we are finding ways now, to value a new conservation economy and caring for country. And everyone has, you know, the farming sector's got a key role in that. Traditional owners, Aboriginal people have got an absolutely key role in that. We've spent the last 100 years degrading our environmental assets, and we've now got to take the responsibility seriously about rebuilding those assets and caring for country. It's a cultural responsibility. but it's also a climate responsibility. We need to care for country. It's an essential part of the response to climate change, and we're not going to maintain global temperatures to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees if we don't invest serious money in caring for country. Carbon farming, Indigenous ranges projects, land care, natural resource management. I just had an email through today while someone else was speaking, saying we're going to have a $100 a tonne price on carbon in Australia. That will unlock incredible potential in terms of the caring for country economy. So this is an area that we need governments to be aligned with, and also the impact investment community to be aligned with in so many different ways to get that value into caring for country. And finally, I'll just say, we've been spending the last couple of years focusing on this incredibly, almost bizarre kind of proposal from Woodside Energy to spend $50 billion on getting more gas out of the seabed in the Northwest Shelf and the north of Australia, and exporting that and creating billions of tonnes of carbon emissions in the process. Imagine, and actually we're just in the process where that company itself is now starting to question that investment. But imagine if we could mobilise $50 billion behind the conservation economy, the caring for country economy, what that would look like, how transformative that would be in terms of, you know, all the things that we want to see together on this call, and also, you know, tackling climate change and restoring our cultural responsibility for caring for country. Now is the opportunity. We're in that inflection point. We've nearly, you know, beaten the energy thing. Renewable energy is now cheaper than any of these fossil fuel types, and we're just about over the kind of hurdle that's been. It's been a huge political and economic challenge, but we're just about on the point where we can open up massive potential in other areas of the economy as we start to see things very differently. So yeah, I'm filled with hope, and part of this conversation and this movement is part of that. And then just finally, I know I'm out of time, but we are trying to gather up all of the examples of community projects across the state that can take action on climate change, invest in the conservation economy, and create jobs as part of this stimulus package thinking. So I'll put up a web URL where we've created a portal where communities can input ideas into that. We will then put them to government, but also I think this will be a resource for the community that we're all speaking with now, for the impact investment community, because it will show that there's an incredible array of awesome ideas across our communities for making these kinds of investments and these kinds of projects that can deliver not only jobs and growth, but do that in a way that invests in the solutions for the future.
Thank you, Piers. That is absolutely fantastic to hear, because I think with the lockdown and the restrictions that with this COVID virus as we've gone through, we've been able to see that just recently, even the footage from, you know, in Pakistan, where the guy was looking out and he can look and see, you know, the mountains for the first time because the smog had lifted. So it's amazing that right now, as human beings, we have the opportunity. The firestorms and that were a wake-up call, say, hey, get yourselves organised. Then all of a sudden, the virus is now telling us, well, we've got a chance, an opportunity here to start again and do it the right way. So hopefully what you're saying and what I've heard from Di so far, we have the opportunity to be able to go forward in that and start looking at it. So Liz and Piers, thank you very much for that. Now Di, and I suppose looking at the enabling investment, Di, as a producer, what's your experience been transitioning production and seeking capital?
I guess, yeah, hello everybody, and yes, I'd just like to pay my respects to the traditional landowners and carers for country on the lands that we're privileged enough to farm here out at Wildcatch and Mollaran. Yeah, the land has certainly taught us a huge amount as people, and yeah, we're just really excited going forward of the further learning that we're going to have the opportunity to be part of. just some of the things that Piers was mentioning, that caring for country economy, to me, is where it's at. I think that's one of the biggest restrictions we've had in trying to progress. A lot of this stuff is that first element of financial return is such a massive limiting factor as far as the rate of progress you can make when it comes to healing country. There's some massive damage out there, as Oral alluded to so clearly when he was speaking. And we really need to refocus our attention on what is most important to us as people, where our priorities lay when it comes to investing. Because if we don't deal with that caring for country aspect here and now and with urgency, anything else we're trying to achieve is really going to be very irrelevant. Yeah, we've seen a lot of those issues, trying to maintain being a commercial producer in a degraded landscape. Takes a fair bit of courage. We've been very fortunate that nature has got some amazing ways of showing us that that healing can be rapid. As Oral was saying, you take the people and the buses and everything else out, very quickly that land can start to sort itself out. But at this point in time, we're all trapped into a system of food production being commoditised. The true value isn't reflected there. There's a lot of infrastructure that's lacking to enable diverse produce to be captured and marketed appropriately. We're all driven into these bulk systems currently, which is very restrictive. And even down to the real practicalities, we're trying to look at increasing diversity on farm and in community, but the basic housing isn't there anymore. A lot of these farms that have got larger, the farmhouses have deteriorated. There's nowhere to have extra people housed appropriately. And even with the towns as well, there's not a lot of additional housing. If you're wanting to bring more people in with diverse skills and expertise and way to contribute to our community out here, where do they live and where can they be safe to do so? So yeah, there's quite a number of factors that we really need to be looking at to make all this stuff possible, which is such an essential way of going forward.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. You raised a couple of things there in regards to how sustainable our regions are, and ensuring that there is maintaining an investment into just the capital infrastructure that's already there. Professor Halsey from Flinders University wrote a report over a year ago, so now identifying these sort of issues. And then also Jennifer Westacott actually spoke in regards to how we should be looking after the next generations of carers of country, but also people who are supposed to be maintaining the sustainable sector that we're looking at out in the Wheatbelt. So what has it been like for you in trying to address those issues that you've raised and trying to seek capital? So how have you find that track, trying to get the support locally, but also on a regional basis? And I think Liz actually raised what Royalties for Regions was doing, but also then on a state basis and a national basis. So attracting that sort of capital, how have you seen that,
Well, I guess historically it's been Ian and I generating our own capital through our own farming practice. It's only recently that we've actually been able to engage in working with additional capital and investment to try and expand and work on this whole natural capital system where we can look at those ecological outcomes from changing farming practices. I think, the whole way forward's going to be heavily reliant upon getting the produce and diverse produce. And I think Oral was spot on there when he talked earlier on about we've got this whole broadacre mentality in this Wheatbelt region, which it doesn't need to be that. We do need to bring so much more diversity, so much more capacity for diversity of enterprise. Out here, we've just been so narrow thinking and channeled, you know, as we're saying, with the infrastructure and the market potentials out there at the moment. But if we can all work together creatively, we can really flip that on its head. And that's where, you know, I see the future for that investment to try and get those enabling factors in place, so get some infrastructure in place so that we can segregate grains, and there'll be a multitude of grains, and hopefully we can get back to you know, harvesting some of these native grass grains out there, which we're seeing returning back in the landscape. And yeah, certainly wanting to learn more from Oral and others as we get to catch up more often. But what are these plants that are coming back, and what other ones may come back with appropriate management? Yeah, so we just need to put all these things in place which aren't there currently, so that that value can be recognised.
Okay. Yeah, you raised a couple of other questions there, but what I'll do is I'll talk to Ollie. I mean, if you understand where Oliver comes from, you'll understand that they've actually, there was a great article in the West Australian today, Oliver. I don't think a lot of people have seen it, may have seen it, but Oliver, can you tell us, as an investor, tell us about Alterra and your experience and approach to identifying opportunities, balancing impact and return?
Thank you, David. So my name's Oliver Barnes. I'm Managing Director of an ASX-listed agricultural investment company, Alterra. We're focused in the southwest of Western Australia to address a number of what we think is time and place opportunities for the industry, and really that opportunity to get capital and put that capital to work to deliver on the vision that we're all talking about today. I think, you know, the vision is clear. I think the value systems are clear, and I think a lot of the participants on this conference understand that. And really our work and the work that I've been involved in over the last 20 years of my career is understanding then what that looks like at the coalface and unlocking that capital to the opportunities, and bringing appropriate capital to understand and address opportunity. And I think there's a lot of frustration in this sector historically about how to go and attract capital and what terms that capital flows into the sector. I got involved in Alterra 12 months ago to position this business. This business historically listed in 2008. We developed over 18,000 hectares of dryland forestry carbon sequestration assets for BP and Origin Energy. So that was over $100 million of invested into the sector, and we certainly borne a large amount of scar tissue dealing with some of the issues that we're talking about today. That business, we brought it through to a mature cycle, and Anthony Fitzgerald, that now runs that business, Carbon Conscious, is on the screen here today. But the opportunity really for Alterra as a listed company, we needed to address and be able to attract capital and be able to put that capital to work. And over the last 12 months, we've really identified a position where ultimately that investment cycle is broken into 3 stages. We've had to break it into 3 stages to attract capital and give the capital markets the kind of exposure that Jeremy touched on and what they look for from their investments. So we are an originator, a developer and manager of what we call in-demand agricultural assets, and we're focused in the southwest where there is land with water and water development potential, which is a particular sector of assets that institutional patient long-term capital is looking to get exposure to, but there is a lack of suitable, well-structured investment opportunities for that capital to flow into the sector. And so what we've had to do is we've decided to be effectively that bridge between that capital and the sector and the community. And from our listed structure, we work with landowners that ultimately have assets that can be repositioned to this type of capital market, but yet still don't have a number of the fundamentals in place to be able to put that capital to work. And what we do is through the origination phase, we work with those landowners to understand what is the potential of that asset, frame that in a realistic and robust business model that is data rich and evidence based, and ultimately really address the first and primary concern of anyone putting capital to work, which is about addressing undue risk of loss within that investment. So that for us is a process on entering any of our investment opportunities. It takes 6 to 12 months. It's really an optimization period and a discovery period, but we do that as a listed company ahead of bringing external capital into the sector. And the key piece here is for all the opportunity that the agricultural sector is providing, the sector is littered with investments that have gone spectacularly wrong for investors. And so, we as a sector need to do a better job of understanding, structuring, and providing a very realistic evidence-based opportunity for that capital to understand what it's flowing and what it's getting exposure to. The second stage to our business model, when we complete the origination and the optimization phases, we house the projects within a special purpose vehicle. And the purpose for that is investors that are looking for the next stage of transition of those assets are looking for development exposure, and they understand development risk, and they want to be able to invest their capital directly into those assets. They want a partner alongside them that understands what needs to be delivered, both at a commercial and a technical level on the ground. But they also want direct exposure and line of sight with governance in place. And what we're doing within our developments, and particularly David mentioned this morning that the West covered our more recent project, which is called Carpenters in Pemberton region. We've taken an asset in that region that historically is being used for blue gum plantations, and we're repositioning that asset into a high value horticultural asset for production of avocados. We know that the long-term patient capital for this asset won't participate in the actual development stage of this asset. And so we need to work with capital markets that understand development and ultimately have a near to medium term investment horizon of 3 to 5 years, understand and price capital according to that development risk, and know that at the end of that process, there is a willing long-term owner for those assets, which currently what we're seeing in the market is pension funds, and matching pension fund long-term capital that is looking for undue risk of loss, looking for yield profiles that hedge inflation, that are uncorrelated to other assets that they've got exposure to. And particularly right now during the COVID period, those assets that they've built into their portfolios that have this type of exposure are doing exceptionally well. So that naturally that their attention is seeking an additional opportunity. And we're able to break down the barriers for that capital to flow and understand better what that capital requires. I think we're going to see a lot more action, and we're going to see a lot more activity in the development side of the industry. And then to bring it back to the relevance of the conversation we're talking about today, which is around impact, I think everyone will be pleased to hear that when you're talking to long-term patient capital providers, their long-term view is 20, 30, 40-year outlooks on assets that have an income stream. And they're already living in the world of extreme climate. They're already living in a world where ESG measurement and impact is a necessity. And so anyone that's developing and building investment opportunities for that market need to be factoring those considerations in the development stage. What I'd like to also explain is by bringing external capital in and understanding that the capital is required for developments, not necessarily capital that wants to go farming just for the sake of farming. You're able to attract capital that doesn't necessarily have the same constraints that a normal landowner may have. And it means that we're able to invest in future-proofing that asset. We're able to build water infrastructure. We're able to put capital to work in improving soils with a long-term view on that, knowing that whilst that will benefit the performance and the income streams of that asset long-term, the investor's getting a return through an exit position when this asset is highly suitable for that pension fund capital. And we see super funds, we see pension funds, both Australian, North American, and particularly at the moment, the Canadian pension funds are very active in this sector as a really highly suitable source of capital for us to build this industry, work with the communities that these projects are housed in. And ultimately, work that we're doing in Pemberton, we're already seeing a number of excellent producers down there. And as a community, the important aspects to that industry is building scale, building distribution, building access to export markets so that we don't live within a bubble, a domestic bubble where we suddenly overproduce and can't transition value. We have on our doorstep an amazing opportunity in Southeast Asia that we've largely ignored. And I think the whole community and effectively what we like to call here at Alterra Team Australia, competing against peers within those markets, whether that be Peru, Chile, Mexico, and some African countries that export product to there. There's a strong future for these types of projects. So that's what we've been on the journey to do. And I think when we talk about capital is at the stage, I talk a lot to capital providers in LA, I talk to capital providers in Europe and now to London, who are already quite advanced in understanding responsible investing and that shift to impact investing. Ultimately, we got to start with measuring all of our impacts and being transparent in those impacts, and then identifying within the investment itself, what are the near-term wins that we can focus and deliver on to be able to fulfill that. And rather than just focus on why our investment's very good in one area, we need to be fully transparent around what are the impacts throughout the on-farm activities and the off-farm downstream activities of that sector.
Oliver, that is absolutely fantastic to hear that. And it leads me to the next question, but also I dare say what Oral was saying earlier and what I firmly believe too and agree with is that how much of this investment that we're actually in projects that are being on the ground, like the one down in Pemberton, the collaboration with the local Indigenous people. So Noongar people actually being engaged in that, but also the landscape view in regards to the hydrology, etc., attached to those sort of projects. So when you look at the landscape view, you're actually saying, well, okay, we're going to collect all this water and make sure that we put it all into a nice little dam here and not looking at the effects of what you're harvesting the water actually does to what's down the track, so below that dam. So
I think that's a great question, David. And I think it's absolutely something when you overcome the capital constraints for a project that you can actually generate a significant water conservation benefit. So what we look at, and I'll use that project as an example, is we see ourselves in a changing climate, which means periods of drying, but it also means periods of significant weather events. And so those significant weather events, 100 mils, 150 mils, have the capabilities to charge dam sites for over the course of 3 to 7 days, not over the course of a year. A significant surge of water that flows out of those systems. And so what we need in terms of a community infrastructure, and I see it as a decentralized community infrastructure with on-farm locations and multiples of these, is infrastructure that's there that can hold multiple seasons worth of water that is surplus to the requirements of the environmental systems. What these dam sites need to be doing is consistently letting water through and servicing the environment that sits downstream. But the fact that we are able to capture these freak extreme weather events and consistently let it downstream means those environmental systems have got a consistent flow of water in the drier periods as well. And I think that's the opportunity that we really see, you know, particularly with our Carpenter's asset, where we've got 2 to 3 times more water potential than we would need to sustain, on-farm water potential than we need to sustain an operation at 300 hectares. And I think it's our responsibility to build infrastructure, not just to get us through the next 5 years of the business, but to get through what the climate looks like in the next 30 years and make sure that surplus water flows for environment, flows back to community, and ultimately, you know, any operations within those regions that high value intensive horticulture can do, which is a huge employment generator for the region. I mean, we've only got to look at how Manjimup has shifted as a town. Yeah. Look at what the dollars that the avocado sector has done for that as an opportunity that really sort of sits here in a number of regions in Australia and particularly Western Australia.
So the question was, how can we improve collaboration across the landscape to increase impact and investment? So when we talk about like infrastructure die, you know, some of the infrastructure out there to actually harvest the small rainfall that comes through. What are your thoughts in regards to that, and how we can, you know, seek investment into supporting that in the future?
I think one of the critical things for this area out here is the fact that, you know, rainfall patterns changing and looking at revegetating that landscape and rehydrating that landscape across a mass area. So we really need a lot of investment support to enable that critically. It's a fairly big cost to be revegetating. Rehydrating across the landscape itself seems to be probably a little bit easier with, you know, the return of native plants. Once you take the brakes off with you know, artificial fertilisers and some of the things that tend to hinder them being present. Yeah, so I think realistically that's what we're needing to do out here, is rehydrate and revegetate, and some of the investment to assist that would be yeah, really helpful to look at what we might be able to do as far as getting the rainfall patterns to penetrate a bit further inland again. And yeah, just taking that heat dome effect that seems to be fairly prevalent across that wheat belt up to the rabbit-proof fence.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
I can comment. One of the things I've seen, and I've worked all over Africa, Eastern Europe in the sector, a bit in South America, and Middle East, and now since I married an Aussie, I've been down here since 2013. But bringing some of that international exposure to the forefront here, one of the things that we need to as a sector overcome is the fear of what our neighbours are doing and competing with the person over the fence. Really, it's about us competing with an international audience for both capital and commodity market position. And so I think there's an opportunity to be a lot more transparent about how and why and what are both the, you know, systems that are working and what the economic profile looks like. And to attract capital never wants to flow into an area where it's the only one and it's the only opportunity. They need to see peers that are also succeeding, and it becomes an ecosystem and an environment where capital gets a lot more comfortable, ideas are shared, and as a sector we get stronger and get scale, and therefore further capital can be put to work. The more scale we can get to a sector, the more capital that flows, the cheaper the cost of this capital becomes, and the less risk attached to it.
Yeah, that question too, I hope we can improve. How can we improve collaboration? Piers and Liz, that's also for you. If you want to respond, that's okay.
I'll jump in again. Fabulous. Thanks, David. So I've got 4 points. I've jotted down some notes and I'll try and keep it succinct. So So 4 points. First point, conversations. I don't think we value enough coming together in an intentional but informal way. I think forums such as this are so great to bring thought leaders together that hopefully spur on future conversations. As an avid networker and someone, you know, who is often the go-to person, it's so having those connections and those conversations are really critical. Second point, bring people along. It can't be an us versus them conversation, as we've seen, you know, in the wake of, well, all of the major challenges that we've had in the last 6 months around bushfire response, around Black Lives Matter. It's that we actually we can't do polarisation. We have to have a space where we come together and have a grey area of nuance. The third thing, being open to doing things differently. Again, great capacity, great opportunity to learn from each other. And finally, in terms of improving collaboration, find areas of commonality. And I'll use two quite different, or in fact 3 different examples. So my family founded Mora Citrus, which is one of the largest second or first largest citrus company in Western Australia. And it was when we were looking for capital to invest in our business, it was actually really important to find investors that had shared values. So that was an area of commonality. So we had a shared vision and we're on the same page. I'm also a non-executive director for Wide Open Agriculture, and we partner with a lot of wonderful regenerative farmers, Di included, sustainable suppliers that form part of our broader network, which again speaks to bringing people along. So yeah, areas of commonality. And the second example I'll use is more a community-based example. When I used to work in regional development, and Di mentioned this around community infrastructure and housing, but in this case it was around aged care. And it is so important for our elderly in our community to age in place. And it improves all forms of health metrics. So it was a conversation that started in the Eastern Wheatbelt around, you know, we have this great need, but a really limited capacity when we act alone. So when it was initially 11 shires in the Eastern Wheatbelt that got together, that mapped their assets and their needs in terms of aged care, and it was only through that collaboration that they were able to attract investment to respond to need, but then it actually grew to the whole Wheatbelt. And so there was a whole strategy around aged care and ensuring that people were able to age in place. So yeah, they're the 4 things, and the last one being around commonality.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Coolin residents actually pulling their money together to buy the Coolin pub now.
Coolin is often an example that I use. They've got such a wonderful reinvestment model. So yeah, I agree, David.
Yeah, no. Piers, have you got anything to add? Just with the collaboration thing? Piers not there?
Yeah, there.
Just quickly aside to that, as Noongar people, we're very proud people and very, very open to partnerships and establishing alliances. As the saying goes, and Di, you raised it Liz, you very quickly there as well, and Di, we're all in this together. Now we've heard that over and over again, just in this short time of space in the last 3 months. But the fact is, that's how Noongar people have seen it all the way through since first settlement. And the other thing too is that fire management has been critical, as we've seen just recently with the East Coast, but establishment of an Aboriginal cultural burning regime actually being established in Western Australia, but then non-Noongar people coming down to actually put the fire practice into play. So when we talk about, when I as a Noongar look at the collaboration side of things and how do we improve that, I think things like just actions like that actually identify that there's no collaboration whatsoever, and that we need to actually start just refocusing on what does collaboration mean and who should I talk to. For example, in Wongan, a lot of Wedgelers or white people will say, oh, there's no Noongars here. But the fact of the matter is, you know, there is opportunities to actually join up and make alliances with, say, for example, the group that Oral represents as the chair. And I know Alan Beattie's actually the new CEO, who's just joined us as well today. Welcome, Alan. Good to have you in this space with us. But those are the sort of things that we talk about when we talk about collaboration, actually including the quadruple bottom line and not so much as harbouring in the space of the triple. So culture is relevant, and as always, as we've heard from Di, especially Di, I mean, you got a lot of service out of the old guy who's gone now, but one of the things about it is that you have access to others in that space as well. So thank you everyone for your participation. I think we have
Piers just got back.
Piers, you're back now. Okay, I've just been delaying for your reappearance, so welcome, Piers. The question we had was, how can we improve collaboration across the landscape to increase impact and investment?
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet dropped out, but I did hear, I think, most of what Elizabeth was saying, and I just wanted to just echo the sentiment there. I thought that they were really well-made points, and I'll just add that I think now is a unique and incredible opportunity for collaboration, because I'm detecting that there's this great level of goodwill across all different sectors to come together, partly around this COVID response, but just in general. I think that there's a new era of politics that has emerged out of this whole thing, a collaborative politics, and I think that we all need to try and keep working in that way, rather than going back to the old kind of culture wars or, you know, however we were doing things in the past, because it wasn't serving us very well. But I think now's the opportunity to do things in a much more collaborative way across all different sectors, because all sectors have got a role to play in this. It's not something that's unique to any one particular sector.
Thank you. So I think we're 15 minutes into a 20-minute breakout.
I'll update everyone.
I'm going to pass you on to Daniel, who will give you an update and a view into how we're going to do the next part of this forum.
Yeah, g'day everyone. So the plan, what we were hoping to do was, and as you would have seen with the registration process, we're asking if people had case studies or projects that they were keen to share with other participants. And we did receive a lot of interest in that, and we did receive a bunch of awesome case studies. But I think this is not certainly unique to this teleconference, but there's a fair degree of Zoom fatigue in the community at the moment, and so a lot of the people that actually put their hands up for case studies haven't been able to attend. And given that we are a little bit over time, what I want to do is basically just open this up to you know, for the next 10 minutes, anyone who has a question for the speakers or wants to kind of highlight the work they're doing and how they see that as part of this broader conversation that we've been having. And then what we'll do is we're already going to survey attendees as all good event should, you know, evaluate the event, get feedback. But we will also share some information on the case studies. We'll share the details. I'll double check with all attendees if they're happy for contact details to be shared. But I mean, the main thing we want is for this conversation to continue, particularly, and that's why we've kind of had this discussion about collaboration. And I think with the energy that's come out of this, with what's the awesome work that Conservation Council is doing as part of the COVID response, yeah, we're very keen for everyone to we want this to become a bit of a community. We want to start aligning a voice to government around, you know, how can government generate investment and attract investment into the regions in a way that, you know, brings us all together and brings the kind of collective impact across the sectors that we want to do. So we have about 15 minutes. So I guess we'll open it up. I know if you know how to use Zoom, I've seen there's a little thing where you can put your hand up or feel free to comment. But Rod, good to see you, Rod. I don't know if you realise you've had your hand up for a while, so I wanted to check to see if you've got a question for the panelists.
No, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everyone, for the presentations. They've been fantastic. I'm speaking here from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. Some people call it Tigerland here in Richmond, but for the footy followers. Yeah, I guess what I'm interested in more broadly, because I've started to think about this kind of activity a little bit in relation to bushfire recovery here in Victoria, and particularly how we can work more with local traditional owners and cultural burning practices and other things you might do in forests to make them more resilient in the future. And so how some of these investment models might work that integrate the traditional owner communities, and what are some of the particular capacity building requirements that might be required in those communities. Thanks.
Oral or Jeremy, have you got anything to say on that, you guys?
I think there's a lot of interest around this, and the interest, it's actually no different to, you know, and I think what I was speaking about in terms of engagement and value and participation, it's the same issue when it comes to fire. I'm one of these crazy critters who I've done a lot of stuff, and I was actually a fiery for 18 years. So, you know, what we've been doing out here is actually, and for the last 12 years, I've been practicing, you know, and doing my own form of traditional burning. Victor Stephenson, who is well renowned for his work, came out here in 2008 and actually got me thinking about it, but I was, well, actually, he got me going with it, but yeah, I've been thinking about it for a while. So, you know, I think there's consistency with what Victor has been talking about nationally in his workshops, and every time he's, you know, he's been given the public platform, and it's consistent right across the country. I think you know, the performance of Aboriginal people in caring for the land is well now documented. There's been books, and we've spoken about people. Everyone's read, you know, those books that are well known to people. The practices have been researched, and the contributions are well acknowledged, but engagement still doesn't happen. So I think, you know, I was asked by our land council here, you know, to contribute on behalf of the Noongar people through SWALSC what was the Royal Commission. Yeah, and I chose not to, simply because I just thought, well, you know, where do we get a return on this? You know, DFARS and DBCA over here, you know, still want to start us as, you know, our young people starting at Certificate 2 in the Ranger program that they control and manage. That's not innovative at all. So I'm not interested in contributing to and participating. I think our knowledge is well recognised and well known. And our old people did it for all those thousands of years. I think the management of forests is absolutely linked to, you know, the hydrology stuff that I know Tim specialises in. It's linked to also to the soil aspects, to carbon, and therefore to the degradation of our agricultural lands. So Aboriginal knowledge, sacred knowledge, allows us to see things holistically. And the health of our forests is linked to the health of our agricultural lands, without a doubt. Our ways of managing all of that is the stuff that we know is our sacred knowledge. And there is no value on that, but we would like that to be recognised. And, you know, I'm not interested in getting involved in tokenistic gestures where we're asked to bring sacred knowledge to be participating in low-hanging fruit initiatives. That's a huge imbalance of respect and value. So I think if people, whether it be organisations, individuals, landowners, or government agencies, or large landholding entities, yeah, I think we've just got to start having real conversations. We've got to start talking to traditional owner groups, to cultural, within those traditional owner groups, we've got to be speaking, and we've got to be putting forward the individuals who hold the cultural authority to speak about, who hold the sacred knowledge and who have the authority to speak with it and for it. Because that's our stuff, and I think that it'll go to the grave with a whole lot of us if we're not engaged properly. So I think our value is actually, and I think I've heard this on a global scale. The people who are going to save the earth are the indigenous peoples, because that sacred knowledge is held by us. So if people are serious about saving the earth or improving the environment, then get blackfellas involved in a real way. Don't bring us in and get our kids who are learning about life themselves and then tell our kids that we're going to start you as a level 2 ranger and we're going to train you how to do blah, blah, blah. That's just insanity. There's too much insanity.
Yeah. Thanks, Oral.
Can I make a comment there as well? Sorry if I'm butting in, if there's a speakers list, but I just wanted to say, I think from the conservation movement's perspective, there's probably still a bit of residue of that old idea that, you know, the best way to look after the environment is just leave it alone. But I think overwhelmingly, in an Australian context, it's now very clear from a science perspective, and the conservation movement has embraced the reality that country needs people and that country needs culture. And so, you know, we need to be able to invest in those things. We need to be able to invest in the opportunities for people to be on country, to practice culture, and that is what is going to sustain, you know, the biodiversity and the elements of the natural environment that conservationists have tended to focus on in the past. That doesn't mean just things like Aboriginal ranger programs. They're a great start, and, you know, we are doing some of those and we need to do more. But investing actually in the fabric of those Aboriginal communities and that cultural value, and that's why we've been incorporating that into these proposals we've been putting to government for COVID recovery. But I think, you know, we can think of the idea of a carbon price in terms of getting financial resources into that conservation and cultural economy and that caring for country. We can think of a carbon price almost as, you know, our way of paying the rent. And, you know, there's other ways of doing that. And we need to, I think, increasingly think in that way. And that's how the conservation sector is increasingly thinking.
I could talk about that one for hours. The role of impact investment in valuing forests properly. I think I'll double check to see if anyone else has got some questions, but I just thought quickly, Jeremy, given your background in investment and forestry, have you got any thoughts on how investment vehicles could, you know, be used to or changed to capture that kind of work?
I think it comes back a bit to my comment on, sadly, we try and put numbers into spreadsheets and we spend too much of our time doing that. A lot of the stuff that Oral's referring to there is about long-term management, and in current investing techniques, the long-term is discounted. It's specifically valued at a lower price than something in a year or 2 years. And that's one of the real challenges that we have, specifically around forestry. We're looking at effectively how you manage major catastrophic risks from bushfire, and you're effectively adding a probability to that, and then you're determining your loss if that was to actually occur. And so that kind of approach is very formulaic, and it doesn't take a holistic view. So it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge in the sense that Australia's experience around a very specific asset class manage investment schemes, which a lot of which were monoculture forestry, produced some terrible results for investors. So there is a kind of aggregation of learning there. In the attempt to give some hope to this discussion, probably the best example I've seen is actually flood risk in the UK. So because flood risk and our fire risk is able to be both relatively well predicted in terms of the areas, but also the outcomes, catchment areas in the UK have taken a much more proactive stance to wanting to reduce those risks. So over there, it was a reduction in hard concrete areas so that you had permeable structures so that water would run off rather than pooling. Here, I think we started the conversation pre-COVID around how can we manage the land in a much more holistic manner. And I think that conversation is going to need to be rejuvenated and picked up again, exactly as people have been mentioning. No easy answers, unfortunately, but there are examples coming forward.
Is there anyone else who's got any questions or statements or things they'd like to ask or put out there before we kind of wrap up soon? Just looking for, feel free to just unmute and.
Daniel, I think just in response to what Jeremy was saying, healing country is an absolute commitment. So of course it's going to take a long time. That's if we think we're going to heal the land in a couple of years, it's just ridiculous. So I think the commitment's got to be real. We only see real commitments when they are committed to for long periods. 5-minute commitments, and that's the problem with the financial sector and the whole investment and the value framework when we consider everything in the context of value for money. So until we change these fundamental frames, I'm very sorry, folks, but we are absolutely kidding ourselves. So let's get real. Let's commit. And those who play in the financial sector and the commercial investment, parts of our community, start shifting those if we're real. Otherwise, let's leave investment and financial commercial activities out of stuff and let people who are committed to country deal with it, because we've got to be prepared to make hard decisions. Sometimes it's absolutely taking the commercial productivity objectives out of the equation completely. And if people, and as I say it again, Aboriginal people are doing that. I don't see too many other people doing it. In the area around us here, we are absolutely, even amongst the Noongar Land Enterprise Group, we are the only property in that group that have made the level of commitment. So, I'm not blowing our trumpet, but I'm just saying that that's what I've observed. We've got the results on our property because we've gone to the nth degree. What I'm confident of is that model is absolutely replicable. So we can replicate it in any region, in anywhere, if the principles and the fundamentals are there, and if we've got the right people leading it. So I guess, Jeremy, I think that, if we can utilise people like yourself with the knowledge that you've got and the experience that you bring, I think we're smart enough. There's no question. In a country like this, we're smart enough to form new metrics, new frameworks, new formulas for finding a solution for the problem that we've got, because it is a wicked problem that we've got.
Daniel, can I jump in? Thanks.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Dave McFall, thanks for, this is a great forum idea, and I congratulate you and the host and the speakers. Yeah, reality is we only live once, so we better make the best of it and do something that counts. Now, just connecting all the dots here, and we're all talking around the subject, but I want to call it out. We've got, if I can borrow some of your cultural language, Oral, a Dalawa agriculture. We got a really mischief agricultural system that we need to seriously address. And I do get a little bit frustrated. I've been around probably too long and seeing a lot of a lot of things come and go, as people have mentioned. But we've got to put this matrix together. We've got to put this puzzle together. And one of the key drivers is really to bring new stimulus back into the regions, and to cover up our landscape and stop the leakage that comes from our agricultural systems, because it is in a chronic state. And a lot of people who've been around like Oral will be very disheartened to see the way that it's continually abused. And that may be for various reasons. That may be for cultural reasons. It may be lack of capacity. So it brings us back to this point of having to generate capacity and within an ecosystems model. And it's really staring us in the face. We've got to cover the land up again. We've got to look at how we cover it, with what type of plant structure or whatever, and what industries we can swing off this to not only you know, push people into it, but actually pull them through the valley of death as well, as some people put it. So I'm not going to rabbit on too much, but I have posted a case study about a project very intimate to me. I've been 25 years, 30 years developing the O'Malley project, very strongly linked to ecosystem services, renewable energy, social stimulation, putting diversity back in farmers' budgets, you know, risk management in the face of climate change, just tick all the boxes. So, you know, if they can be, that case study can be circulated, Daniel, I'm very happy to follow that up with anyone that's got any particular interest in this. And I do think a lot of people on this forum really want to see real dinkum change, because we've been kicking this can around for a long time now and it's not going anywhere. We're seeing a dramatic social decline in our communities. We're seeing the youth being burnt out, and we've got some real toxicology issues relating to food health and soil management, and we've really got to get in touch with ourselves and get on with it.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone else? Conscious we're now buying into people's lunch time, if you're in WA, that is.
I'd just like to conclude in one area, and I think it touches on what Liz also touched on, but I think we need to all be speaking with one voice as an industry and getting organised, and then having a very clear communication plan around what we are trying to address here, because multiple voices of multiple opinions just gets lost in the mainstream, and to do this well and do it at scale, we need to be bringing this into the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, is there any... All right, over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I think we've, and one of the things that we've seen is that we're pretty much all in the same boat, rowing in the same direction generally, trying to come up with our own solutions our way, but not looking at, I think sometimes we, and I think Liz, you summed it up quite nicely, worrying about what the neighbour's doing over the other side of the fence. And it, as Noongars, we look at it on a landscape view right across Noongar country, right down to Albany up to, you know, Geraldton and across to Kalgoorlie. So, you know, the view that we have is what we should be aiming for, you know, in this space in regards to how we go forward with, I suppose, regenerative investment. I think Impact Seeds provided us with a great opportunity to not only crystallise our thoughts, but also be able to share some good practices. So some of the good work that's being done out there, we're being provided an opportunity to be able to share that amongst ourselves. And it's a pity that we didn't get to the case studies that, you know, I mean, because I was really keen on participating in all four, I think. I know that's not, I'm not able to, but at the same time, the work that's being done really excites me, because it fits in with my platform, and also Oral's way of thinking that, you know, we're all caring for country, and the best way of doing that is by coming up with some really good practical ideas, and not only practical ideas just for a business or for ensuring that stuff gets done on the ground, but also taking into account the people. And the people are the reason why we do all this wonderful work, isn't it? It's our family, it's our kids, it's our neighbours, it's our community. That's the critical part that we sometimes just lose in the whole concept of trying to ensure that we make a buck. One of the thing that really I want to share with you right now is along the lines of trying to understand that we have an opportunity to be able to, and Piers, I love the work that you do. I mean, you're in the coalface and you're really trying to generate, and you could probably talk for another few hours in regards to, I suppose, the idea of what we call a clean state. I mean, as Noongars, we see all these beautiful titles come and go. We've seen beautiful people like yourself come and go. The reality that we face is how do we make it sustainable, resilient? How do we future-proof our country? Not just for our food, in food security, but also looking at aspects in trying to ensure that we do have a forest in the future, that we do have good, clean water, that we can actually, you know, we don't have to take out of the ocean and spend all this energy. And we know what sort of energy we're talking about when we're talking about desal plants. But the reality is that all of these wonderful stuff, and that also feeds into our marine and aquatic, so our estuaries and our river systems. These are things that are so critical to how we as human beings actually relate to our country, our budget. So when we talk about a clean state, you know, how do we reduce carbon pollution or remove carbon from the atmosphere? Great idea, but everybody still wants to, and I think once the restrictions were lifted, getting people back to work in the city, you notice how many cars are actually on the road again. You know, how we can build another lane on the freeway to ensure that we get everyone up from Bunbury, you know, to ensure that they're working 9 to 5. So we have all this wonderful stuff, but we say it, and I think at the last election we saw the proof of how the quiet majority, as Donald Trump alludes to, had their say at the ballot box. And these are things that we have to change. So looking at renewable energy, I mean, Noongars, we don't have the capital. We're you know, we'll probably get to the stage where we're land rich but dirt poor, as well as other First Nations peoples all over Australia. 80% of, you know, the North Country is owned by our brothers and sisters in the Aboriginal communities. We're trying to gauge, but we know that there's a lot of land just in the south of the 26 as well, owned by Aboriginal people. And yet, natural assets that are critical to our society as we see it in West Australia and even in Perth, you know, are not owned by the First Nations people. We're sort of, you know, as Noongar people, for example, you know, the state forests, the national parks, they're not owned by us. So how do we manage them? And it's that de facto relationship that we're actually talking about. When Oral talks so strongly and so powerful, you know, and I look up to my conch and with awe, because it has to be said. You can't change the fact. We have the facts. The data is there to show, the proof is there, the records show that we want to do all this stuff, but we've been excluded, and we don't need any acts that have been amended and changed in the past. We need action, whether we like to call it climate action. It was good to see some in the recent report, even though I actually submitted a paper in regards to the Fire Royal Commission. I was so angry of being not heard, but it's good to see some of the things that are being pushed from that Royal Commission, is that the First Nations peoples are the ones who are up in the front. So that leadership role, so the Royal Commission's actually identified, but we have governments that will actually come by and try and change the way that we actually implement it. And Piers knows climate action does not mean anything to do with action for climate change. And it's a totally opposite. So we've got to be very careful. So protecting and restoring and managing our natural ecosystems is critical, but support for the Aboriginal, our First Nations people, and value, monetising that, it's so hard, but, it can be done. It can be done. For example, a fire management regime, 52 million set aside for prescribed burning each year by the state government. Going to the government as an alliance of trying to protect our forests and to build our capacity as Noongar people, going to the state government with a Noongar position and saying, can you give us $10 million out of that 52 to start up our capacity building amongst our own people? So people like Oral and people like Elijah Jacobs actually lead this. So Noongar people and elders actually lead how we transfer that knowledge across, that traditional ecological knowledge, to ensure that not only is when Oral passes away and I pass away, that we have young people coming through like Ezra and like Elijah that can still continue that, and all the other young people. It's great to see, and Oral and I are fantastic. We see our sons actually growing up together and taking on the next challenge of maintaining and connecting themselves to not only their country but their culture and their responsibilities. We as the larger family, and this is the whole thing that Liz was talking about. And Liz, I accept your challenge, and I hope that you also accept our challenge, because we as Noongar people, we are there, we are on the country, and we want to work with everybody out there that's trying to make these changes that are required. As we just heard, mallee oil's been around mallee farms have been around for a long, long time, and it's a positive, but it's also access to country, access to land, access to the opportunities that provide with, trying to achieve capital investment into try and build everybody's economy. So how do we sustain those regional centres, but also those little towns that surround those regional centres is critical, because broadacre farming is not going to look after country. Broadacre farming is not going to support family structures. And I'm talking about, Wedgelers or white people's families. They're not going to support them, because we have a situation where we have fly-in and fly-out farmers now. And it's sad, because the family structure is being broken down piece by piece. It shouldn't be happening. And this is the sort of stuff that we're talking about. We're happy to invest in backpackers coming over and putting the crop in and taking the crop off, and yet we have a natural resource that's sitting in these little towns that support those regional centres and those food chain, or the block chains that we talk about, all the way through from gate to plate, and yet we continue to disregard those. And so when we talk about jobs, Piers, we're talking about how do we make it real, and not just write it up in a white paper? How do we make it real and put it into a practical sense of saying, here we go, we're doing it? And that's what we need to do as West Australians, but also as Southwesters. We need to become not only out there saying it, we need to be practical and say, yes, we need to be putting these things. And these projects that I've seen so far, absolutely fantastic. That's why I love the fact that Oliver was on today and we were able to hear the wonderful stuff he's talking about. It is happening. It's practical. The next part of the conversation that Oliver will hopefully go back with is the idea that how did I include the million people into that space? How did I actually get them involved? So these are the practical stuff, challenges that we have, because we can't continue to ignore the fact that the First Nations people whose land we're on, whose sovereign rights are being not only disregarded, but we need to ensure that these sovereign people have a say, but also have a major impact on how we go about doing business in the future. So changing the way that we do things, whether it's as an alliance or establishing groups specifically targeting specific areas within the sector, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in food, whether it's in coming up with new ideas for water management or food security or even forestry. These are the opportunities that we're provided with right now, and it's up to us as leaders in this space to be able to take that challenge and to go forward. So thank you all for your input today. Best wishes on going forward, but also thank you to Daniel for coming along and picking me up today and making sure I got here on time. But look, we have lots of guests from all over Australia, so I'd like to also thank you for your time and energy and the input today. So, and I look forward, I think there will be a follow-up. I look forward to the opportunity of participating on the next one, and I hope that you will be able to join us. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Well done, guys. Thank you.
Well done. Congratulations. Anne here from Greening Australia, and I thank you for a wonderful forum. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. Bye.
Thank you all.
See you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you.